Hello, I want to welcome you to my first episode of what I'm calling my Primer series. Primer meaning introduction, and these will be mini episodes that I will drop on occasion between my main episodes. And these mini episodes, these primers, will attempt to keep you informed about any recent global outbreaks. I hope you enjoy. M.V. Hantavirus. You've never heard the name, but you have heard the story. April 2026, a 70-year-old Dutchman aboard a small adventure cruise ship develops what looks like the flu. Within days, it's not the flu. Respiratory failure sets in, and he dies. The world takes notice, not because one man died, but because of what might be behind it. An unknown infection, a death that came fast and hard. Was this the opening scene of another pandemic? Then the pattern starts to repeat. Other passengers fall ill with the same symptoms. 2 weeks later, in a hospital in South Africa, the Dutchman's wife dies too. By the time it's over, 13 people will have been infected. 3 will be dead. And in the middle of this, on a ship too small to hide from an outbreak, too far from land to easily escape it, doctors identify the culprit, Hantavirus. Here's the twist. Hantavirus isn't supposed to do this. It's not a headline virus. It's obscure, geographically confined, historically responsible for small, scattered clusters, never epidemics, never pandemics. If pandemics were a movie, Hantavirus wouldn't even get a line of dialogue. It's the extra in the back of the crowd scene. But on the M.V. Hantavirus, for a few tense weeks, Hantavirus got its close-up, and the world, still carrying the scar tissue of COVID, held its breath and asked, is this happening again? So let's get intimate with Hantavirus, what it actually is, and why this outbreak turned out to be so unusual. It isn't one virus, but a family of closely related ones. They're spherical to oval in shape, and critically, they carry their genome in 3 separate RNA segments. That segmented structure matters. As we'll see, it's central to how the virus replicates. Once it gets into the human body, Hantavirus can produce one of 2 distinct syndromes: hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome and pulmonary syndrome. There's some variability year to year, but globally, the virus infects somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 people annually. Most of the burden falls in Asia, Korea and China in particular. Europe sees roughly 2,000 cases a year. The Americas, by comparison, are a footnote. Rare, scattered, almost forgettable. Almost, because there's one subtype that breaks the pattern, the Andes virus, found in South America. And of every Hantavirus strain out there, this is the one that keeps epidemiologists up at night. In the United States, there have been 890 cases since 1990. But if you want the story that put Hantavirus on the map in America, you have to go back to 1993. The 4 corners where Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah meet. A healthy young Navajo man came down with sudden, severe respiratory illness. He was dead within hours. Then came more cases, more deaths. Investigators eventually traced it to a previously unidentified Hantavirus strain, one so mysterious in its origins that they called it sin nombre, the nameless virus. Its history goes back further than most people realize. Japanese and Soviet troops noted its presence in Manchuria before World War II. It was the Korean War that put it on the world's radar, when more than 3,000 UN and American soldiers fell ill with hemorrhagic fever and renal syndrome, a brutal combination of internal bleeding and kidney failure. And through all of this, one thing has stayed constant: the reservoir. field rodents, deer mice, voles, rats, depending on the strain and the region. Humans were never the intended hosts. We are the accident. A stray breath of contaminated dust, a bite, a dropping disturbed in a barn or a cabin, and the virus finds its way into a species it was never built for. So how does it get into you in the first place? The virus lives in the feces, urine, and saliva of infected rodents. Disturb dry droppings, sweep them, vacuum them, kick up dust while cleaning out a shed or a cabin, and you can aerosolize the virus and breathe it straight into your lungs. Or it can be simpler than that. Touch a contaminated surface, known as a fomite, then touch your nose or mouth, and the virus has its way in. Once inside, Hantavirus doesn't behave like most viruses you'd expect to hear about. It moves like a ninja. It targets endothelial cells, the cells that line your blood vessels, and attaches itself to the cell wall. But here's the strange part. It doesn't burst in, as most viral infections are lytic. They invade the cell, hijack it, and eventually rupture it, spilling cellular debris into the bloodstream and triggering a loud, obvious immune alarm. Hantavirus does the opposite. It's non-lytic. It clings to the outside of the cell wall. Quiet, patient, like that ninja scaling the outer wall of a castle, waiting, not yet raising the alarm. By staying quiet, it dampens the body's own immune and inflammatory response, scrambling the signals the immune system relies on. And here's the cruel irony. When T cells, the immune system's front-line soldiers, finally do attack, they end up destroying our own infected cells in the process because of exactly how the virus is clinging there. But quiet doesn't mean harmless. While it clings to the outside, it's also slipping into the endothelial cells and beginning to replicate, building more of itself without yet destroying its host cell. This is where the RNA comes in. Think of the viral RNA as a portable printing press the virus carries with it. It hijacks the cell's own machinery, reprograms it, and turns it into a factory churning out millions of new viral copies. Eventually, the sheer volume overwhelms the immune system, and the walls the virus was so carefully preserving start to fail. Capillaries begin to leak, blood and plasma flood into surrounding tissue, the hemorrhagic component of the disease, and in the lungs, that same flooding produces something horrifying, the sensation of drowning from the inside in your own inflamed and infected fluid. The immune system, sensing this scale of the invasion, goes into overdrive. But that aggression backfires, damaging blood vessels further and worsening the very leakage it's trying to fight. The result, depending on which syndrome takes hold, fever, low blood pressure, internal bleeding, kidney failure, and the inability to produce urine. In hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome, which carries a mortality rate up to 15%, or in hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, the lungs fill with fluid and mortality can climb as high as 50%. And out of every hantavirus variant in existence, there's exactly one that epidemiologists watch differently from all the rest, because it's the only one capable of spreading from human to human. The Andes variant carries an incubation period of 1 to 6 weeks, on average 2 to 3. It's geographically confined to South America, tucked into the range of the Andes Mountains it's named for. And it's the one variant out of the entire hantavirus family capable of jumping from person to person. But before this sounds like the next COVID, it isn't. Compared to a true airborne respiratory virus like influenza or COVID-19, Andes virus transmission is far less efficient. If I had to compare it to something, it would be closer to mononucleosis than to the flu. You're not catching this by sitting across a conference table from someone. You need close, sustained, intimate contact, sharing cups or utensils, sleeping in the same bed, kissing, sexual contact, or being confined together in tight quarters for an extended stretch of time. And when Andes virus does transmit, it tends to produce the more lethal of the two syndromes, Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, with a higher mortality that comes with it. There's still no treatment, no vaccine. Supportive care is all medicine can currently offer. So the question becomes obvious. How did an obscure virus like this end up on a cruise ship, killing passengers and rattling the entire world? At first, there were theories. Had the virus mutated into something more virulent? Was this even hantavirus at all? Or something else entirely, wearing its symptoms? PCR testing, a technique that takes a small genetic sample and amplifies it millions of times over until there's enough material to identify with certainty, confirmed it. This was hantavirus, specifically the Andes variant. However, this only deepened the mystery. If this was the Andes virus, how did it end up spreading on a ship in the middle of the ocean? One early theory were that rodents were on board the ship, and passengers were exposed to droppings or urine or somewhere in the ship itself. But the leading theory, still not conclusively proven, traces back further to before the Dutchman ever set foot on the MV Hondius. In February of 2026, the index patient and his wife had been traveling through northern Argentina, avid birdwatchers making their way by RV through the region, territory well within the range of the Andes virus and its reservoir host, the long-tailed pygmy rice rat. The theory holds that somewhere along that journey, a rodent found its way into their vehicle and exposure happened there, weeks before they ever boarded a ship. From Argentina, the couple traveled to the southern tip of South America and boarded the MV Hondius, which began making its way through the South Atlantic. By April, the incubation period had run its course. The index patient fell ill and died. Then others aboard began to show the same symptoms. 2 more deaths followed. Hantavirus, without question, is a lethal pathogen when it takes hold in a human host. But from a public health standpoint, here's the reassurance underneath all the drama. This is not a virus built for global spread. It's not COVID. It's not the next pandemic waiting in the wings. It's a rare, geographically bound, inefficiently transmitted killer. One that, for a few weeks in the spring of 2026, found itself in exactly the wrong place, on exactly the wrong ship, and briefly stepped into a spotlight it was never built to hold. But let's not mistake relief for complacency. Somewhere out there, another pathogen is waiting. One we haven't named yet, one we don't yet understand, and it won't announce itself before it arrives. So we watch. We stay vigilant because the next patient zero doesn't send a warning.